Hey there, it's Tom Jordan. Nice to have you here today on a Wednesday, the morning after the vice presidential debate last night. Did you watch it? Well, if you did, or even if you didn't, here are some of the highlights.
Do you care to respond to any of those specific allegations, including that the vice president is, quote, letting in fentanyl and using kids as drug mules, among other things regarding children?
The drug mule is not true, but I will say about the fentanyl, because this is a crisis of this, the opioid crisis. And the good news on this is the last 12 months saw the largest decrease in opioid deaths in our nation's history, 30% decrease in Ohio. But there's still more work to do. But let's go back to this on immigration. Kamala Harris was the attorney general of the largest state and a border state in California. She's the only person in this race who prosecuted transnational gangs for human trafficking and drug interventions. But look, we all want to solve this. Most of us want to solve this, and that is the United States Congress. That's the Border Patrol agents. That's the Chamber of Commerce. That's most Americans out here. That's why we had the fairest and the toughest bill on immigration that this nation's seen. It was crafted by a conservative senator from Oklahoma, James Lankford. I know him. He's super conservative, but he's a man of principle, wants to get it done. Democrats and Republicans worked on this piece of legislation. The Border Patrol said, this is what we need in here. These are the experts. And the Chamber of Commerce and the Wall Street Journal said, pass this thing. Kamala Harris helped get there. 1,500 new border agents, detection for drugs, DOJ money to speed up the adjudications on this, just what America wants. But as soon as I was getting ready to pass and actually tackle this, Donald Trump said no, told them to vote against it because it gives him a campaign issue. It gives him what would Donald Trump talk about if we actually did some of these things? And they need to be done by the legislature. You can't just do this through the executive branch.
We have to stop the bleeding. We have a historic immigration crisis because Kamala Harris started and said that she wanted to undo all of Donald Trump's border policies. 94 executive orders, suspending deportations, decriminalizing illegal aliens, massively increasing the asylum fraud that exists in our system. That has opened the floodgates. And what it's meant is that a lot of fentanyl is coming into our country. I had a mother who struggled with opioid addiction and has gotten clean. I don't want people who are struggling with addiction to be deprived of their second chance because Kamala Harris let in fentanyl into our communities at record levels. So you've got to stop the bleeding. You've got to re-implement Donald Trump's border policies, build the wall, re-implement deportations. And that gets me to your point, Margaret, about what do we actually do? So we've got 25 million illegal aliens who are here in the country. What do we do with them? I think the first thing that we do is we start with the criminal migrants. About 1 million of those people have committed some form of crime in addition to crossing the border illegally. I think you start with deportations on those folks.
Just to clarify for our viewers, Springfield, Ohio does have a large number of Haitian migrants who have legal status. Right. Temporary protected status.
Well, Margaret, but
thank you, Senator. We have so much to get to.
Margaret, I think it's important because
we're going to turn out of the economy. Thank
Margaret,
you.
The rules were that you guys weren't going to fact check, and since you're fact checking me, I think it's important to say what's actually going on. So there's an application called the CBP One app, where you can go on as an illegal migrant, apply for asylum or apply for parole, and be granted legal status at the wave of a Kamala Harris open border wand. That is not a person coming in, applying for a green card and waiting for 10 years. That is the facilitation of illegal immigration, Margaret, by our own leadership.
Thank you, Senator, for describing the legal process. We have so much to get to, Senator.
Those laws have been on the books since 1990.
Thank you, gentlemen.
The CBP One app has not been on the books since 1990. It's something that Kamala Harris created, Margaret.
Gentlemen, the audience can't hear you because your mics are cut.
You're free to disagree with me on this and explain this to me, but as I read the Minnesota law that you signed into law, the statute that you signed into law, it says that a doctor who presides over an abortion where the baby survives, the doctor is under no obligation to provide life-saving care to a baby who survives a botched late-term abortion. That is, I think, whether you're pro-choice or pro-abortion, that is fundamentally barbaric. And that's why I use that word, Nora, is because some of what we've seen, do you want to force Catholic hospitals to perform abortions against their will? Because Kamala Harris has supported suing Catholic nuns to violate their freedom of conscience. We can be a big and diverse country where we respect people's freedom of conscience and make the country more pro-baby and pro-family. But please.
Yes, Governor, please respond.
Look, this is one where there's always something there. This is a very simple proposition. These are women's decisions to make about their healthcare decisions, and the physicians who know best when they need to do this. Trying to distort the way a law is written to try and make a point, that's not it at all.
What was I wrong about, Governor? Please tell me, what was I wrong about?
That is not the way the law is written. Look, I've given this advice on a lot of things, that getting involved, that's been misread, and it was fact-checked at the last debate. But the point on this is there's a continuation of these guys to try and tell women or to get involved. I use this line on this, just mind your own business on this. Things worked best when Roe versus Wade was in place. When we do a restoration of Roe, that works best. That doesn't preclude us from increasing funding for children. It doesn't increase us from making sure that once that child's born, like in Minnesota, they get meals, they get early childhood education, they get health care. So the hiding behind we're going to do all these other things when you're not proposing them in your budget. Kamala Harris is proposing them. She's proposing all those things to make life easier for families.
I asked a specific question, Governor. You gave me a slogan as a response.
It's not the case.
Yeah, it is the case. Actually, if you look at, we'll get into this in a minute. We'll delve into this in just a bit, discuss some of the Q&A, the back and forth with Republican strategist Jason Rowe, who has consulted many candidates, including presidents, senators, and House members, including the current candidate for Congress in Michigan's up for grabs 7th District, Tom Barrett. A seat that is currently held by Democrat Alyssa Slotkin, who's running for the U.S. Senate seat against Mike Rogers. So it's an interesting race there, the Republican candidate for that U.S. House seat. So Jason Rowe, representing him and consulting as well, will join me in just a few minutes, and I'll get his thoughts on a whole slew of issues. The debate, what's going on in China, and Tim Walz's seemingly cozy relationship with them. Before we get to that, just a reminder to chime in, comment, or ask questions in the comment section, and I'll get to those in just a moment. Also, best way that you can help Tom Jordan Live is simply subscribe and click on that notification bell. All right, to the vice presidential debate last night. Let's discuss that. The one between J.D. Vance, who you just saw there, and Democratic Socialist Tim Walz. I want to bring in Jason Rowe, friend of the show, first time on this particular program, political strategist with Rowe Strategic, and of course has worked on a political and communication strategist for more than 3 decades, nationally recognized for his work in campaigns and government advising candidates for president, Senate, Congress, governor, state and local offices, and free market interests. Jason Rowe, good to have you on the program. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me on.
You got it. So I guess your big takeaway from last night, when everyone's saying this morning, it's such a civil debate. We had civility finally one of these debates, but to me, I'm watching this so frustrated by the lies that were being spewed, and I do call them lies, out of Tim Walz's mouth regarding the border, regarding abortion, regarding international crises, et cetera. What was your takeaway?
Well, listen, I go into it expecting to get a screw job at some level from the format and the moderators. So, that's kind of baked in for me. What matters is how your candidate performs and the opportunities and contrast you draw with your opponent. And I thought J.D. Vance really showed up last night. He came prepared. I thought he was likable. He was intelligent. He was articulate. He was just combative enough to draw blood without seeming obnoxious. There was, I think it was a little more enjoyable and less stressful to watch because of the civility. But, as much as the moderators didn't fact check Tim Walz and that he got away with some lies, and it's quite a pattern of lies too. And it's on little things and big things, which I, find to be an interesting combination of his veracity. I think it drew some contrast, and I think we drew some blood and exposed that the Harris-Walz ticket is not prepared to lead, and he didn't really answer many of the questions other than the ideological ones, and it wasn't really about policy. And I thought Vance, came with some pretty concrete points to be made. So I think, when you watch, I flipped and watched each news channel's coverage after the debate last night, and CNN came out hot. Like Abby Phillips, who I'm not expecting, basically gave the win to Vance and said that Walz looked like he didn't come in prepared for it. CNN is saying that, obviously Fox is going to be saying that. Every channel, BBC was saying that. And then I got to MSNBC, And it's like they were watching a different debate. I mean, to listen to them try to spin what had just happened was pretty jaw-dropping. He didn't do well. He had a couple moments. You better in nearly 2 hours of time up there. But I don't think there's any, a question that J.D. Vance came out the winner of that debate.
No, and you're right about that. But even the ones that have said, listen, J.D. Vance won this last night, but they've also said that, but Tim Walz did really well on abortion. And you could look at some of the polling, and yeah, when he spoke about abortion, his, favorability kind of stats kind of went up during that. But he also lied during that exchange with J.D. Vance. He said that, Minnesota has no such law that would allow a doctor to not save the life of a baby that was born after a botched abortion. And we know factually that's just untrue, because there's been many examples of babies being born alive after botched abortions in Minnesota. And in 2023, Tim Walz also signed into law. He got rid of the obligation for doctors to report that there was a baby born alive after a botched abortion, no longer needing to report that. But even before that, there's no ramifications or consequences to that. What do you think of that exchange, and what do you think is really happening in his state regarding these babies being aborted but surviving those abortions? And somehow this is one of those, mind your own business type of issues that don't step in here, even though there's a baby right there struggling to breathe, and you're not going to help that baby.
Yeah. Well, another thing that's baked in is, I think, who the parties are when it comes to abortion. If you're a pro-choice voter, and a plurality of Americans are, you're always going to like the Democrat better than the Republican. That part is baked in. I think what Republicans need to do, and I think what J.D. Vance demonstrated last night, that we're not lacking empathy for people that have to go through this very difficult process, and that I haven't heard yet any national Republicans say that they favor a national abortion ban. So this is still an issue that will continue to be left to the states, and voters need to understand that. But I think to show a human side of the position on that, and I think J.D. Vance did that as well as I've seen any Republican politician do it lately. But the other part of that, no one talks about the extreme abortion positions the Democrats are taking, including the Harris-Walz ticket, which is basically abortion on demand through the 9th month. That's just a fact of what they support as a matter of public policy. And they try to deflect from it and talk about how few occur at that time. But listen, when they happen the other times, it's not like those are good times. I mean, we've gotten away from talking about people that are using abortion for birth control. And I think that offends people when people have multiple abortions because they're not taking the steps to make sure that they do not become impregnated. And there are plenty of options available. This is not 1973 where women didn't have a lot of options. But the idea that we are minimizing what abortion as birth control means, and that creates a lot of trauma for everybody involved. I don't care how callous you are. So, we're not going to win this, but I think we do need to talk about it in a different way. And I think J.D. Vance did that last night.
What do you think, though, is, you're a strategist, and Republicans, they're not often bringing this. I know they try to, and they don't have the media on their side, but when they ask questions like that, Donald Trump had to be the one asking Kamala Harris in the previous debate, do you have any restrictions on abortion whatsoever? What is it, 7-month, 8-month, 9-month? And she wouldn't answer that. How can Republicans bring that extremism up in a much more effective way?
Yeah. Well, listen, I think you've got to highlight it when you can. But, going back to, if you're a pro-choice voter, you're not going to, reflectively go to the Republican candidate if that is what drives you. And, it would be for a mistake, I think, for Republicans to go out and spend a lot of time fighting over this issue that you're not going to win the voters that you're trying to win. Republicans right now are well positioned on inflation, on energy issues, on national security, on gas prices, on grocery prices, on housing affordability, housing supply, what's happening in our schools. Like on every other issue that affects every American, Republicans have huge advantages. And so I think we need to remember that that's what most impacts every voter's life. And that's where we have advantages, and that's where we should be taking this fight, not spending time fighting on an issue that the Democrats have the advantage. And there may be a time where there is, I think, a more fair fight in trying to get the Republican message out on this. But this is really the truly first post-Dobbs election in which we're seeing activity in the states that's shaping the national debate, codifying in the Michigan Constitution, for instance, pretty much an unlimited right to abortion. Voters still don't even know, even though that passed by over 60%, how extreme that is. It's going to take time for them to learn the excesses of the pro-choice movement right now. And I think as more education happens with voters, Republicans, I think, can make a little more headway in getting a more reasonable abortion policy in our state laws than the extreme things that Democrats have been pushing.
Right. I think that's smart. That's a smart, I think, tactic and strategy. Kind of mention the extremism and then pivot to something else more important that people care about on both sides of the aisle, like illegal immigration. And this was brought up. They argued about it last night. They both pointed fingers. So Tim Walz accuses Trump of being the reason why there is this onslaught of illegal immigration coming across the U.S.-Mexico border by blocking that, what Tim Walz says was a wonderful border security bill in the U.S. Senate, and it did not pass. And now it's become this campaign issue. Tim Walz tries to explain this ongoing surge under Kamala Harris is that being the reason for it. Do you think he made headway on that argument, or do most people see that's just kind of bogus?
I think they, just like we don't have a lot of credibility on abortion, they have no credibility on immigration. I think it's adorable, the attempts that they are making. Listen, the numbers do not lie. You have 10 million border interactions during the Biden-Harris administration. That is not manufactured. Just 6 months ago, you couldn't turn on even the Today Show without seeing the hundreds of people amassed at the southern border trying to get into the United States from throughout Latin America and Central America. We know the causes of it. In some cases, it is domestic security in their nations. But the reality is that the Harris and the Biden administration essentially invited them during the 2020 campaign. They pronounced that they were going to demolish the Trump immigration policies, and that they would be welcomed in this country. And these immigrants took Kamala Harris at her word and started to migrate here. They were encouraged by the now former president of Mexico. There is a lot of involvement with the cartels and the financing of this now. It has become an industry that the cartels have embraced to bring people into the United States. There's complicity within the Mexican government. And Trump was standing up to that corruption, and it showed. And he put in, Senator Vance mentioned 84 policies that the Biden-Harris administration revoked in that time, and the numbers don't lie. Now we don't see the amassing at the border, but we both know that the reason is that the policy changes that they made is if you go in through what they're deeming a legal process and basically go to the immigration and custom officers that the U.S. taxpayers are paying and say, we want to come into the United States, they will then, the Mexican National Guard will transport illegal immigrants from Mexico to U.S. immigration officials. That handoff is now legal as defined by the Biden-Harris administration. And so rather than them waiting at the gates, we are escorting them into the country, getting their information, and then turning them loose into the interior with the promise to return. Tom, you and I both lived in San Diego, and we lived along the border. I was there a couple months ago, and I was back in the interior of the U.S.-Mexican border, and I literally found a stretch of about probably 25, 30 yards that had one string of barbed wire. I stepped over, I'm in Mexico. A man who lives in a trailer along that area told me that he regularly sees the Mexican National Guard handing off illegals, often Chinese. When I was walking up and down the boundary, I found this ID right here. It is a Guatemalan citizen who was issued a government ID by the Mexican government They come over the U.S. border and they toss it into the dirt because they don't want to be found anymore. So the identification they come into this country with, they abandon and then go into the shadows within our country. That's not considered an illegal border interaction. That
Right.
is us escorting these people into our country, turning them loose, and not even finding a way to legitimately track them.
So this was the point, like last night, when I was infuriated because this is what's now being described as legal immigration
Yep.
in this country, and it is not. It was something that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden suddenly made legal. They changed the definition of an illegal immigrant, turned it into a legal immigrant, and now there's millions of them in this country. And so when Margaret Brennan last night tried to fact check J.D. Vance by saying the Haitian immigrants in Ohio, which are illegal immigrants, she says, well, no, they're actually legal. They have legal status in this country. It's only because, she was making the point that J.D. Vance was trying to make, that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are now welcoming illegal immigrants into this country by turning them into legal immigrants without going through the vetting process. They show up at the border illegally, and they're given ID cards, as you just touched on. And J.D. Vance tried to make this point with Margaret Brennan, but of course they cut his mic off. And she wasn't supposed to fact check anyway. That was part of the agreement. But that CBP One app is how they do this in countries like El Salvador, and I don't know if it's Honduras, Guatemala, and Colombia and whatnot, and that region of Central and South America. They can just go on an app and sign up, and they're suddenly granted legal status. That is now a pathway to almost citizenship, because they've also said they want to turn these immigrants into U.S. citizens, which eventually will allow them to vote. So when you saw that interaction from the moderators, from Margaret Brennan was primarily the one doing this, but Norah O'Donnell, the same thing, interjecting their opinion and not being straight up with the American people about what they were really doing, what was your reaction to that?
Well, of course, your blood boils. Even rewatching it, in the preamble to our interview, it's just infuriating that they continue to do this. And, this is the problem with the media today, is the constant gaslighting and constantly taking facts that support the conservative view of what's happening in America and dismissing it as being unworthy or irrelevant or inaccurate, while embracing things that are untrue. One area that, recently I discovered is a huge talking point that is being perpetuated by corporate media is the reduction in violent crime in America. That is relying on FBI statistics that police stations and sheriff's departments around the country have to provide to the FBI in order to be tracked. There is not full participation, and in fact, in many of these surveys, New York and Los Angeles do not participate. In the past, the city of Detroit has not participated. So we're not getting an accurate assessment from the FBI of what real violent crime is. If you go and compare that to the Center for Disease Control, who actually gets the data from the coroner's offices in every county in America. So these are the people that have to rule cause of death from a scientific standpoint. The numbers are dramatically higher than the FBI data points. And guess what? Over the last 4 years, it shows a consistent increase in violent crime in America. We are not, as citizens, as voters, provided that CDC information by the mainstream media because it isn't helpful to Harris and to Biden. We are provided the inaccurate, the incomplete, and the untrustworthy data that the FBI is producing, and told that we are once again wrong when the actual data demonstrates that we are right. That's what's frustrating people right now, and that's where the media continues to undermine their credibility in this process.
Yeah, you're right about that. Violent crime is up in this country. If you look at those numbers and don't go to the FBI statistics, you're right. Don't include New York, Los Angeles, sometimes Miami-Dade County, high crime areas in this country. And not to mention the fact that now there are about maybe the thing about 13,000 convicted murderers who are illegal immigrants running free around right now in this country, and that is contributing to the increased crime rate as well. I want to ask you about this because this was not brought up last night, and then I want to talk about Tom Barrett because this is a really important race. to maintain control of the House of Representatives. But what was not brought up last night, and there was an investigation, and the House Oversight Committee has now requested documents that show that Tim Walz is very suspect in terms of his cozy relationship with the Chinese Communist Party. He admits he's been there many, many different times. He celebrates the way China runs their country, but this is run up by a party called the Chinese Communist Party. They are communists, and they have human rights violations. Yet he lauds China as this wonderful place that he has visited time and time again. You think that should have been brought up last night? If this was Donald Trump, say his cozy relationship with Russia, if that was a reality, that would have likely been brought up, don't you think?
Well, I think it's an important thing for us to know more about. I mean, listen, if I go anywhere 30 times, which is, and I have no idea what the specific number is, but, what I read in one article was that over 30 times he's visited China. Boy, that's, first of all, that's not just hopping on a puddle jumper for the weekend. That's, 15, 20 hours of travel each direction. If I go there 30 times, there's obviously going to be an affinity and a relationship with that country that makes it unique in my life. Yeah, I think that is something that the American people deserve to know. I think that's part of the problem with this very abbreviated coronation of Kamala Harris and her running mate, is that they have not been vetted. They have not gone through a primary process. They have not been on the ballot on a national ticket. The media and the Trump campaign and the Republican National Committee have not been provided ample opportunity to understand who these people are and inform voters of what their choices are. And, we deserve to know that. And this is a, geopolitical threat. It is a military threat. It's an economic threat. And we need to understand that. One thing I've found interesting, and I do polling in races, in different regions within the country, Democrats as voters don't seem to care about China. Affiliations with China do not bother them. And I think that's one of the reasons that Democrats don't spend more time trying to distance themselves from the appearance of being China lovers, is that their base don't feel that hostility. I think.
Why is that, do you think, Jason? Do you think it's because maybe they subscribe more to this communistic type of mentality? Is that part of it, do you think?
I think that, when the Democratic Party is far more socialist in its ideological view of the world, it's, a few shades to the center from communism as we know it. But I would say when you look at what we've known liberalism in the United States to be in the past and what it is today, where they are trying to clamp down on free speech, they seem to embrace, more totalitarian views about how we as Americans and individuals live our lives. I mean, we clearly saw it during COVID, in which they felt like, extra legally they had the power to tell us to stay in our homes, not to see our family members, to not travel, to have curfews. I mean, it was a pretty dystopian and terrifying period of time. And I think we saw that something we didn't think could happen in the United States of America, showing itself under Democratic leadership around the country.
Yeah, I know they seem to really enjoy that time frame as well, that kind of power that they had. I want to turn now to the House of Representatives, because Republican, they want to maintain their majority in the House. And Michigan, I mean, these races that we're seeing here, I think match kind of the candidates we saw last night on the vice presidential debate stage when you look at their ideologies. So there's the 8th district in Michigan. That's Dan Kildee's seat, which he's now retiring from that. So you got Paul Young, who's a strong conservative going for that. He aligns a lot, I think, with J.D. Vance. But so does Tom Barrett in the 7th district. And this is a seat that he's running in that is currently held by Alyssa Slotkin, and he's going up against a guy named Curtis Hertel, who seems to align. Curtis Hertel is a guy that would align more of like Governor Gretchen Whitmer. Like, he's got her support, this far left progressive ideology, where you got a Tom Barrett who's very concerned about, national security and law enforcement and the uptick in crime in our national borders. Can you describe the importance of this race? And where do you see this race going? Because this is a seat that used to be a strong Republican seat. It's in a more conservative district. But Alyssa Slotkin has held this now for about 3 terms.
Yeah. Well, it is. It's the biggest race in the country. In 2022, when Tom ran against Alyssa Slotkin, It was tied for the most expensive race in the country at $39 million for one House seat. Slotkin's now running for U.S. Senate. It's an open seat. And as you mentioned, Curtis Hertel's the Democratic nominee. It's already expected to be over $40 million and could be the most expensive of the 2024 cycle. Polling right now, public polling has given Tom a 7-point lead. That was before the Kamala Harris ascendancy, but I don't think that's changed the race in Michigan a whole lot. So Tom still maintains a slight lead, but the Democratic spending is a lot heavier. But I think the contrast between who the two of them are is pretty stark, and I think offers a real vision. This is a seat Mike Rogers, our U.S. Senate candidate, had for 14 years. He served as chair of the Intel Committee. He was succeeded by former Senate Majority Leader Mike Bishop, who served 2 terms, and then Slotkin defeated, and she's been in that seat ever since. Tom is 22 years in the U.S. Army, Iraq War veteran, logged more than 1,000 hours as a helicopter pilot, came home and, started a family in mid-Michigan, got elected to the state legislature and distinguished himself. One, is the only Iraq veteran in the legislature, but as someone who fought to get veterans benefits that they were entitled to and reform some of the systems within the Veterans Administration hospitals. But he also was known as a fiscal hawk, and he voted against all these government, taxpayer-funded subsidies to the automakers and the electric vehicle battery makers, which have turned into a fleecing of the taxpayers. Billions of dollars of taxpayer money given to global corporations in exchange to jobs that have never materialized. And rather than moving forward, they're retreating, and the taxpayers got screwed. Among those projects is the Chinese communist-owned Goshen battery plant that they're trying to build in Big Rapids using $175 million in direct taxpayer funding in addition to tax incentives. Curtis Hertel voted for that in the Senate. He was Governor Whitmer's lobbyist and helped make sure that the funding was approved by the Appropriations Committee. He signed non-disclosure agreements to negotiate with Goshen and these other corporations without the legislature even knowing what they were voting for while he was, party to it. He spent 22 years in government as an elected official compared to Tom's 22 years in the Army, and he's Governor Whitmer's top ally. So this makes this a really big race. The candidates know each other well. They served in the Senate together. They've debated each other many times. But it's a pretty good contrast. Tom's focused on bread and butter issues that affect people's lives, and like inflation and gas prices and, protecting our nation, closing our border, deporting people that are here illegally. Just common sense stuff that people, approve of. Curtis Hertel supported a 45-cent per gallon gas tax increase when Governor Whitmer proposed it in her first budget. He supported making Lansing a sanctuary city. Lansing's now amongst the 25 most violent cities in America, and he thought that making it a sanctuary city is a good idea. He's on video saying that he thinks we should open our borders more and that people that are here illegally are law-abiding citizens. So he's far outside the mainstream, but he's got millions of dollars coming in from billionaires that are close to Whitmer in Silicon Valley and Hollywood and Manhattan. So it's going to be a big race. It's an exciting race, but I feel pretty good about where we are.
Yeah, I do too. And I really like Tom Barrett. He happens to be, this is a district in which we are sitting in right now, where we're broadcasting out of in our studios, and it's a district in which I also happen to live. So I've been watching this
and
very,
one I
very
grew
closely.
up in, Tom. I grew up
and
on
one
the
you
south
grew up
side
in.
of Lansing.
Yeah, fantastic. We have a lot in common. We spent time in San Diego, and now we live in the same district where you grew up in it. So, hey, it's really great to have you. A lot of great insights. Jason Rowe with Rowe Strategic, ROE, also a strong consultant for the candidate for the 7th District in Michigan, the House of Representatives, Tom Barrett. Appreciate it so much, Jason. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Tom. Take care.
Have a good one. You too.
You too.
Hey, want to get you quickly updated on this. We have a guest coming in to talk about it, but Iran launched this missile barrage against Israel as retaliation for the deaths of some key Hezbollah and Hamas leaders. Here's some of the video of it that happened yesterday. This was pretty incredible when we saw these missiles raining down on a wide swath, a wide portion of the entire country of Israel. The Iron Dome of Israel successfully intercepted most of the rockets that were protecting these the critical infrastructure and the civilian areas. U.S. forces currently providing some additional support to Israel, underscoring the strong military alliance between these two nations, thankfully. The attack follows weeks of escalating tensions between Iran and Israel, with these proxy groups like Hezbollah and Hamas already involved in this conflict, not to mention the Houthis as well. So the U.S. State Department, they imposed new sanctions on a couple of Israelis and West Bank group, though critics argue that those measures don't address the real threat, which is Iran, the country that launched these missiles yesterday. Tehran, the capital of Iran, has long used Hezbollah and Hamas as these proxies in its regional ambitions to destroy Israel. But the direct attack this time around signals this kind of new level of boldness from the Iranian regime. And the White House warned of severe consequences should Iran continue its military escalation against Israel. So Israel has begun this kind of limited ground invasion into now southern Lebanon, where Hezbollah exists, and they're targeting these positions in response to these recent attacks. Good for them. We've got about 3 U.S. Navy destroyers and an aircraft carrier now positioned in the region, prepared to assist Israel in defending against further missile strikes should they come in to that great nation. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, praised Nasrallah. He was one that was leading Hezbollah for about 30 years. He was killed by the IDF, Israeli Defense Forces. The Ayatollah praised him, this terrorist, as a martyr, and they vowed further retaliation against Israel, raising concerns about another prolonged conflict in the Middle East. Donald Trump was in Wisconsin as the attack unfolded, and he says he's been warning about this and what all this could lead to for a very long time. Here's what he said.
Launched 181 ballistic missiles at Israel, and I've been talking about World War III for a long time, and I don't want to make predictions because the predictions always come true. We're not going to make, but they are very close to global catastrophe. We have a non-existent president and a non-existent vice president who should be in charge, but nobody knows what's going on. She was at a fundraiser in San Francisco, a city that she totally destroyed, by the way.
Yeah, it is a city that she helped destroy, which she was the district attorney in San Francisco and then became the attorney general of California. So Donald Trump continued that he said this, quote, "When I was president, Iran was in total check. They were starved for cash," which was true. They were fully contained, and they were desperate to make a deal. Kamala and Joe Biden, I'll add to that, flooded them with American cash, and ever since they've been exporting terror all over and unraveling the Middle East. So under President Trump, we had no war in the Middle East. There was no war in Europe. There was harmony in Asia, no inflation, no Afghanistan catastrophe. Instead, we had peace. Now war, or the threat of war, is seemingly raging everywhere around the world, and it involves American interests and the U.S. military in some form or fashion. And the two incompetents, as he might call them, running this country are leading us, as Donald Trump would say, to the brink of World War III. I want to bring in a good friend, Rocky Raczkowski. He's a retired lieutenant colonel with the U.S. Army and was the 2010 Republican nominee for Michigan's 9th Congressional District, knows a lot about foreign conflict and overseas situations. Rocky, welcome to the program. It's nice to have you.
Hey, good morning, Tom. And you had to bring up the political race, therefore bringing back some bad PTSD.
No, I'm sorry about that. Yeah, you probably have more PTSD than your time served in the military. Well, to that point, and I want to get your perspective of the vice presidential debate last night, because these are two VP candidates, which I think accurately represent their broader parties, respectfully. J.D. Vance, the Republican, and Tim Walz, the Democrat. And that kind of trickles down their ideologies to all these various races, whether they're congressional or Senate races or local state races around the country. What do you think of the debate last night?
I watched the entire debate with my wife and was in real time texting both my Democrat, Independent, and Republican friends and seeing what their reaction was. So my reaction may be a little bit skewed, but theirs is a little bit more accurate because they're not as politically involved as I may be. But I will tell you that J.D. Vance did himself a complete solid last night. He performed extremely well. He listened. He was civil. He watched Walz without making any extraneous movements or reactions when Walz was speaking. And only once in a while would he kind of look at the camera and lift his eyebrow a little bit when Walz would say something very unusual. So I thought his answers were very succinct, very compassionate. He brought the old moniker of the 90s and the early 2000s of the compassionate conservatism to real light with the MAGA crowd. He actually threaded the needle and brought compassionate conservatism with MAGA together for making America great, but yet having conservative, compassionate, basically solutions for people in the United States and how we move our country forward in a positive direction.
You know, you bring up that compassion aspect of it, Ruck. Sorry, go ahead.
I thought by far J.D. Vance won this debate.
I do too, and I think he was honest, and Tim Walz was not. I mean, Tim Walz even said it's not true that children are being used as these drug mules. That is a truth. That is a fact, and I know that from people I've talked to that have seen them. Some of these kids are dead, and they're hiding drugs within their body. I mean, it's sick what's happening down there at the border, and people don't talk about this, and they're defended somehow. These drug cartels is essentially ultimately who's being defended by the media and right now the Democratic Party. But you talk about the compassionate aspect of J.D. Vance and the Republican Party. It's the reason that I am a conservative. I didn't become a conservative for any partisan reasons at all. It was because I finally came to my senses as a young man thinking, listen, these policies are what are going to directly benefit individuals in this country far more so than what I grew up on, these democratic policies that keep people, whether they realize it or not, in this kind of oppressed state of living. So independence, liberty, and freedom, and an ability to live the way that you see fit for your own lives, that is a conservative ideal. And it's somehow this narrative that the Democrats are the compassionate ones. I don't know how that became so prevalent in this country. But that is the narrative that's out there, and it's completely false.
That's absolutely correct. And, you know, a lot of times I would speak to elementary school students and talk a little bit about politics. And one of the things that I would tell them, if I kind of highlighted, because the question would come up, what's the big difference between Republicans and Democrats? So when you're talking to second graders, you try to bring it down to their level as much as possible so that they can understand it. And I basically would say both parties really want to help people. They come at this from the positions of helping people. If we take the money out of it, then what's the big difference? Well, Republicans want you to make your own decisions, want to help you by giving a hand up when you need it, but they want you to be in charge of the direction of your life. While Democrats basically want to tell you how to live to have a better life. And that's in the most simplistic way. When you take the money out of politics, that's the most simplistic difference between the two political parties.
But it's a great description, and it's exactly one of the major reasons why I became, I realized I was a conservative. I didn't become one. I realized I was one because that's the compassionate, I guess, choice, politically speaking.
We all are, actually.
Yeah.
I think we all are. I've got a friend that lives down the street from me who happens to be Greek, and she tends to vote Democratic and puts up Democratic yard signs. But every time we talk with my wife and we talk with her husband, they always talk conservative, and they always agree with us. And I'm like, you do realize you're a Republican. You just were raised a Democrat. You gotta break those chains.
Yes, exactly the case. It's why the Democratic candidates now for office are pretending they're conservative with their views on crime and the border and foreign threats and all that kind of stuff. So speaking of a foreign threat, Iran now launching this barrage of missiles at Israel following the death of Hezbollah's leader in power there for 30 years. So Iran suddenly has all these tools that this came up in the debate last night that, Tim Walz tried to make the claim that Donald Trump is to blame for this because he got out of this agreement with Iran to, not make them a nuclear power. But in the meantime, what he failed to mention was that under Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, Iran has now had access, which they didn't have before, to tens of billions of dollars in order to fund these attacks against Israel directly or indirectly, whether they're using Hezbollah or Hamas or the Houthis or just their own government themselves. That seems to me, from my perspective, what has happened, why this is occurring right now in the Middle East. What's your thought on that?
Absolutely. So that people understand, Hezbollah, which is the satellite group for Tehran, for Iran's government, the Ayatollah, and their extremist government, is a militia that is not part of Lebanon, but it's a separate militia inside of Lebanon, and basically is their political party as well. So it's more Shia, it's Shia dominant, and they predominantly have the southern portion of Lebanon. They are not Lebanon, but they control a large portion of Lebanese politics. Then you've got Hamas in the Palestinian territories, and Hamas is not the Palestinian people, but the Palestinian people voted for Hamas in large numbers. I think more because of, when you put a gun to someone's head, you get a confession, if you wish. But in this situation, Hamas is also a satellite group for Tehran. And then you have the Houthis, which is in Yemen. They're a breakaway from the Yemenese government, and they've created the civil war in Yemen. I happened to be in Yemen once upon a time, and I got to tell you that the Houthis are a well-trained militia by the Iranian Guard again, and they are that third proxy. And the reason why Iran created these proxies so that these three groups could keep Israel occupied. And I think now, for the first time ever, Israel is doing absolutely exactly what I would do. They are using deterrence, and they basically say, if you hit us, we will hit you. Hamas did the atrocious atrocities of October 7th and the attack that killed so many individuals, innocent individuals. Therefore, they had to be dealt with. They were dealt with, and we saw what took place in Gaza. Now, when Hezbollah is shooting weapons into Israel from southern Lebanon, that needs to be dealt with, and it was dealt with. I would have to say strategically, and one of the best setup that you could possibly have, and that is either Mossad action or a military intelligence action where you had pagers blow up in their first and second tier of leaders. You've had radio communication devices blow up in their third level of leaders. And then basically one step after another, they took out the leadership and those that ordered the attacks on Israel, as well as the missile and rocket attacks on Israel. And they let Hassan Nasrallah, which is not loved. He is not loved in Lebanon. So when you see all these protests here of people saying we stand with Lebanon, they do not stand with Lebanon. They stand with Hezbollah. Lebanon, if you look at the Shia and the Maronite population, the Maronite are the Catholics from the north. My wife happens to be Maronite Lebanese, born in Lebanon when they came here legally when she was 6 years old. So I think I know a little bit about Lebanon and the history. And the Maronite population, the Greek Orthodox and the Armenian population and the Sunni population are happy that Hassan Nasrallah is gone, because he was the one that was controlling Lebanese politics, and he was the one that was controlling these attacks on Lebanon. And that's why you saw Netanyahu so eloquently say to the Lebanese people, our fight is not with you. Our fight is with the terrorists and with Hezbollah.
Yes.
And once you take out, listen, Tom, when you take out these three proxies, then you basically uncover the onion. You basically peel off the onion and you see exactly who's causing this. And who is actually causing this harm is Tehran, the extremist regime in Tehran, and they have to be dealt with. Deterrence deals with answering those that attack you. And Israel was attacked yesterday, and they will answer quite effectively.
Yeah, I want to get into that, but I do want to mention this real quickly because you brought up the fact that there's so many people in this country who think they're supporting the Lebanese or they think they're supporting the Palestinians, but they're not. They're actually supporting Hamas, and they're supporting Hezbollah, and they're probably supporting the Houthis, and they're supporting Iran. They're being used as these useful idiots. And I think a lot of these protests, these students who don't have an understanding of what's really occurring there, a lot of these protests are being paid directly, it's been reported, by Iran itself. So if you pull back the layers here, and you're kind of the onions being pulled back, layer by layer, and you expose Iran. So there's a gentleman that I think both of us know, we've spoken to, is General Jack Keane for the Institute of the Study of War. And he told me, he said, listen, what the United States needs to do is to support a strike directly on Tehran, go after Iran. They're not going to come back at us because they do not want that larger conflict with the United States. At least not right now. They don't want that. But we're not doing that because I think we're afraid that there is going to be a larger conflict. But if you go right for the head of the snake, that means you're going to stop Hezbollah, you're going to stop Hamas, you're going to stop the Houthis, and maybe Israel can finally live in peace. And we won't be under the direct threat as we are right now with what's transpiring in the Middle East. Do you agree with General Jack Keane's philosophy and his suggested tactic to finally, take down this regime?
Absolutely.
Or this threat, I should say.
Yeah. 100%. I believe General Keane is absolutely correct. He hit the nail on the head. And he's using not just deterrence, but he's also using basically a page out of Sun Tzu's The Art of Warfare. And that is that you have to take the head of the snake off. You have to decapitate the head of the snake so that you don't have the snake coming after you. When you look at, in the facts basically bear this out, Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis, by the way, have been funded by money that came from Tehran. Outside of their small fundraising campaigns and terror fundraising campaigns, a majority of the money and the weapons came from Tehran. And it's interesting when you think about the Palestinian area of Gaza, they were screaming that there's no food, there's no water, there's no electricity in the region once Israel attacked. But yet they never ran out of one thing, and that is rockets and weapons. And why is that? Because Tehran, instead of funding and helping the people and living in peace, they continuously funded a war machine where they created tunnels and weapons, and they moved weapons and rockets and missiles into those tunnels to attack Israel. So General Keane is absolutely correct. And the sad part about it is we have an administration right now, the Biden-Harris administration, that is scared about going after Iran. And we had an administration before them, the Obama-Biden administration, that continuously funded money to Iran. And to have Governor Walz, the VP candidate with Vice President Harris, say specifically that it was Trump's fault for pulling out of the nuclear agreement, Trump did exactly the correct thing. The correct thing, because otherwise the Abraham Accords with the Sunni nations would have never happened, number one. And number two, you continuously give Iran more power to grow economically. And what's the worst thing that we ever did was we weakened our energy capabilities in the United States and allowed Iran and Russia to grow their energy capabilities and fund their terror weapons. You want to end the war in Ukraine? You want to end the war in the Middle East? Bankrupt Russia and bankrupt Iran by cutting off their fuel, as well as, most importantly, flood the world with fuel made out of the United States.
Yes. You can't negotiate with terrorists. And it seems like the Biden-Kamala Harris administration has done just that. And we're not even talking about the danger that now the Taliban, I guess the threats because of what we've given to the Taliban, given them control now of Afghanistan, the $90 billion worth of weaponry that they can now sell off, and the rise of Al-Qaeda and ISIS-K. And all of that to say this, do you believe, when we got millions coming across the border and Kamala Harris seemingly wanting to give those millions of people U.S. citizenship in this country, who's coming across? Do you believe there's a Mike Rogers told me the other day that he believes absolutely that there are terrorists now in this country thanks to what Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have done in places like Afghanistan and their appeasement to Iran. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. I do agree with that. And by the way, coming back to Afghanistan, if I can correct something, I hear a lot of individuals talk about how many weapons we left. we didn't leave our military equipment. And I know that even some that I support politically from Washington are saying that we left a lot of this equipment. No, we actually did not leave any of our new equipment. The military, wherever they go, they bring back their equipment, their MTO, their TONE, their equipment that they're tasked with. The stuff that we left behind are older equipment that we gave to the Afghani government when we were building them up, and we basically sold it to them under foreign military sales. That was about $86 billion worth of equipment, but it's old equipment that we no longer use. So,
Okay, well, but they can still sell it off. I mean, the Taliban has now control over all of that equipment, and they're selling it off and making quite a bit of money. So thanks for the correction. That's the first I've heard of that kind of take on it. So thanks for bringing that up into it. Always really good to talk to you, Rocky. It's a privilege. I want to keep you having come back in the program. Real quick, your predictions for, I'll just say the presidential race November 5th.
Well, I just cast my vote, and I know my wife talked to me as well. She cast her vote. No pressure. She didn't put any pressure on me. She voted for Trump, and then I voted for Trump. So I know he's got 2 votes, at least from our household.
All right, that's good to know. Early voting. Yeah, Republicans should get there and vote early if you're able to do that. It's a big advantage that we now have. If the Democrats are doing it, we should do it as well. Thanks so much, Rocky Raczkowski. Appreciate it. Always good to talk to you.
God bless you, Tom. Thank you.
God bless you. Have a wonderful day. All right, I want to get to some of your comments. I know some people have been chiming in. I'd love to hear from you. Let's go to the board here. If Cameron could put this up. Cliff Frost. Roe is a never Trumper. Jason Rowe. Okay, Cliff. So Jason Rowe does not support Donald Trump. He doesn't like Donald Trump. That is correct, but he does agree with his policies. This is one of those situations, tricky situations, where you have someone that does not like Donald Trump's personality, but very much agrees with his policies, and as does Tom Barrett, and Tom Barrett is a strong candidate. So in that regard, I would say that Jason Rowe supports the policies of this kind of conservatism, and he kind of explained that as well. You might not like his personality, and a lot of people don't. And I'll be honest, I didn't like Donald Trump's personality prior to him running for office either. But when I saw what he can do and what he stood for, that's when I really got supportive of Donald Trump back in 2016 as a conservative Republican presidential candidate. But Cliff, good to hear from you. Thanks so much for that. Any other comments we want to put up there? Do you have time for them? Okay, we don't have time, I guess. That's going to be it for us. Listen, remember, you can always share this. That helps us out a lot. Or you can just click on the notification bell if you're watching on YouTube or on Facebook. Subscribe on our X account as well. And this will continue on our various platforms, our podcast platforms, including Spotify, and Apple Podcasts as well. Go to Tom Jordan Live. You can learn more about the program. And if you could, go to Patreon and help us out, if you can, with a tiny little stipend every month. $2.50, maybe $5 a month helps us out quite a bit. And we'll generate some exclusive content and some exclusive conversations on that platform as well. All right, until next time, Mike Rogers is scheduled to join me tomorrow morning for Tom Jordan Live. That's on Thursday tomorrow. Until then, God bless you. Have a great day.